Hello, and thank you all for joining us. We thank you for being here online. We would have loved to have this discussion in person, but climate change is an issue that must be addressed, COVID or not. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we will answer them at the end with the Q&A. We are brought here tonight for a panel discussion titled Sustainability in Nantucket High School, How We Move Forward. Our panelists will explore actions already taken to make NHS and the greater public school system more sustainable, and how we utilize those actions and lessons learned as we look to build upon our community's sustainability success. This event is hosted by Mass Audubon's Nantucket Wildlife Sanctuaries, which stewards and maintains over 1,000 acres of open space to its two locations, Lost Farm and Sacajah Heathlands. Mass Audubon is represented tonight by Sanctuary Director Sam Kefferston, who worked with us to establish the Youth Climate Committee, and we will continue to partner with Mass Audubon on events raising awareness about climate change impacts and solutions within our island community, including another event being planned in the spring. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. At the end, we will have a Q&A. Now, without further delay, let's introduce the panelists. Ashley Erisman is a current
Thanks for inviting me.
She's a current Nantucket High School science teacher, specializing in environmental science. She has been the NHS Environmental Club advisor for the past 5 years and has seen numerous student attempts at addressing sustainability in the schools. Ashley is a 2001 graduate of NHS, so she has some perspective on changes in sustainability at NHS over time. In her spare time, she serves on the Nantucket Conservative Commission, and for fun, she enjoys exploring all of Nantucket's open space. Mandy Vassell is the current Nantucket High School principal and is excited to participate in this panel. She had to attend an emergency town hall meeting, but we know she would have loved to be here. Posey Constable serves as the executive director for Sustainable Nantucket and is a lifelong islander hailing from Oahu, Hawaii, later on Manhattan, and as of last spring, now resides here on Nantucket. Posey is keenly interested in understanding food chain vulnerability on island and working with community members to make our food system more sustainable and resilient. Emma Young is a 2011 graduate of Nantucket High School. During her junior and senior years, she was a member of for Students Sustainability, a small collective of peers giving a student voice to the wind turbine project and spearheading other sustainability awareness initiatives. She currently lives on Nantucket and continues to be passionate about sustainability on island and beyond. Sarah Swenson is a sophomore at Nantucket High School and a member of the Nantucket Youth Climate Committee. She is passionate about climate change and hopes to raise awareness about topics of sustainability on the island and in global community. Maisie Cocker is a senior at Nantucket High School, and she is the editor-in-chief for the school's newspaper, Veritas, along with co-editor-in-chief John Carl McGrady. John Carl McGrady is a senior at Nantucket High School and is the other editor-in-chief for Veritas, the school newspaper. He organized last year's successful school strike for climate awareness and delivered the closing speech. He has also delivered several speeches on other social issues such as gun control, at student walkouts, and community gatherings. With everyone introduced, I would like to pose a question to all of the panelists. What does sustainability mean to you, and why is it important? Let's start with Ms. Erisman. After you respond, you can call on the next panelist.
Putting me on the hot seat first. So sustainability for me means the ability for us to provide for our current society, for ourselves, but to also ensure that we have supplies well into the future and that our Earth continues to function as it should while giving us those natural resources and supplies. I forget the second half of the question already. What it means to me, I guess, is really my future, all of our futures. And I think that the number one reason I'm teaching environmental sciences at the high school is to promote a more sustainable future, or we're in big trouble. And with that, I guess I'll give it over to Posey. That's the next.
Dude. Good evening, everybody. What is sustainability? Sustainability to me is a sort of a holistic it's a big cycle, right? We're on this little vessel out 30 miles out to sea, and we have lifelines to the mainland in the form of electrical cables that bring us electricity, and then we have shipping lines that bring us our food, our fuel, and friends and visitors, and get us back and forth to the mainland as we see fit. And then there's airlines that bring people back and forth. But while we must get, and I don't have the number, but the number of ships delivering the number of food trucks and fuel cars to the island throughout the year can't be considered sustainable. This is crazy. Look at the traffic it's engendered, and what happens when the harbor freezes, or if there were to be a shipping strike. You can't assume that we won't run into scarcity as we did in the early spring as COVID first ravaged our country. We have to be mindful of how to plan for these things going forward. So I'd like to have an earnest engagement with all members of the Nantucket community about what things we can do to help protect our fragile island and its community of people who love it and thrive in it, by taking actions ourselves individually and collectively to do things to use less and recycle more. And I do this on behalf of all of us and my two daughters and their soon-to-be grandchildren and everybody else. We got a big world here to help support. So I would like to pass it on now to my esteemed colleague from the panel. You're up, John Carl.
Sure. So I guess to me, sustainability is sort of a broad term that we use to mean continuance into the future. Like sustainability for me, I guess it's about making sure that for as long as possible going forward, humanity is able to survive and thrive on Earth without depleting natural resources, without overusing anything. And there's lots of ways that we can look at that. We can look at that through sustainable energy. We can look at that through sustainable food. We can look at that through sustainable waste. And it all comes down to just trying to not take out more from the environment than we put in. Like we talk a lot about net zero, and that can be net zero carbon, or it can be net zero energy. It can be net zero waste consumption, net zero consumption. And I think it's about just making sure that we don't take out more of any given resource than we create, because then we'll run out of the resource, and that's not sustainable. And well, looks like next up, Emma Young.
Thank you. I see sustainability as balance and a circle in terms of what you put in and what you get out, and a way to move forward that's not creating destruction in your path, and kind of just progress into the future. You want to be able to keep going and not put roadblocks up before you. So whether that's trash or the ozone layer, or like Posey said, the inability to get basic resources, all those kind of roadblocks can get in your way if you're not being sustainable. So sustainability is a way to kind of keep the cycle moving in a healthy and clean way. I will pass it on to Sarah.
I think sustainability to me is making sure that we use only the resources that are appropriate, making sure that we're aware of the resources that we use, and the energy and food that we consume, and the waste that we produce. And I think it's very important, especially right now, with the way we've been trending. We have to be aware of where we're going. And as a young person who's going to be growing up in the world that we leave behind, it's very important to me. Maisie?
So to me, sustainability is kind of looking at this emergency that's going on in front of us, and the wildfires and the flooding, and all these red lights and like the 7-year countdown clock and being like, oh my God, what do I do? And I think sustainability is kind of taking everything that we know and taking it to a personal level and a community level and being able to kind of, in your small sense, try to fix things for your community and move forward and just try to make a livable future. I think it's important for my generation and all of us, all the people who are coming up as well. Are we gonna, I think that's all of us, right?
Yeah, I think that's everybody. And so I'm obviously some of the questions we were gonna ask, we're gonna have to move past because of our panelists who couldn't make it. But a lot of these questions are, obviously the panel can still totally be very successful and go forward. And I think our next question on here, that I wanted to ask was, Ms. Erisman, since you've been a teacher at the high school, what are some of the biggest improvements you've seen? Because, I feel like a lot of this panel is going to focus on how we can improve going forward, but it might be nice to start with like, what are the changes we made that have been really big improvements already? Like how have we progressed from where we started?
So that's a tough question just in the last 5 years. I think one way I feel like we've made major progress is even in a meeting like this. Like, I think that the awareness among the student body has grown exponentially in the last 5 years. And I think that's due to many things. I think the unfortunate state of the world has really pushed your generation to be more thoughtful about the resources they use and about what their future will look like. So I think that's been a major success that I see in the high school. I think as far as true sustainability within the high school, there are some hurdles we need to work to get over to really push some changes. So some of the students I've worked with it, in the kind of previous environmental clubs, we tried to tackle cafeteria sustainability, but never really had enough momentum to do it. We've also tried to tackle proper recycling in the school, and they had missions to put up signage and better direction, but I don't know that actually changed student behavior. But I think that the energy within the school and within the student body has changed in the positive. And I think in the future, we're going to see major strides at the high school.
So speaking about improvements, Emma, you were here, you were a student at the high school when they put up the wind turbine. So can you talk a little about that, like what it was like getting the wind turbine at the high school and, why that's such a big improvement for the high school in terms of energy?
Yeah, so the turbine went up actually about 10 years to the day, I think, which is pretty amazing that it's still running. When we first put it up, the only other one besides the oldest mill was at Bartlett Farm, and that one was pretty finicky. Not there now, and I don't know how long it lasted, but it had a lot of issues. So it's amazing to me to see that the one at the school is still going strong. There was definitely like some pushback from the community, and as far as I know, I think people have come to really embrace it. I don't hear people saying like it's an eyesore anymore. I think at first it was just kind of shocking. And I think now it's really just part of the skyline, it's part of the community. And I assume that it's producing some really good energy for the school.
That like specific thing, kind of the initial shock of people looking at this giant piece of metal and being like, oh my God, this is so different. What were some things that you did with your peers to kind of encourage people to get used to it or to kind of educate on why it's important?
That's a great question. So actually one of the main things that we did as students was to attend the Historic District Commission meetings when they spoke about it. if you know about the HGC, you know that they can be pretty picky about stuff, especially something as new and different and metallic as that. So that was kind of where we got to put in our voice and say, look, we're students. We go to this school and we want to make an impact on the community, and we think this is what should be done. So that was really neat. One thing that stands out to me is that if you look closely, the wind turbine is not white, it is gray. And it was originally going to be white, but that was very shocking. And that would be too bold for Nantucket.
Are you serious? Are you serious?
I'm 100% serious. We had to fight over that one a little bit, and I'm not sure. I guess the company that built it was willing to paint it for us.
Wait, so let me get this straight. You were gonna have the wind turbine that's behind the school. That was gonna be white, and the community was so passionate about it not being white that you like got it custom ordered to be like a slightly off white shade of gray.
Yeah, I'm not sure like how it happened, but that was part of the ruling that if it does go up, it can't be white. It has to be gray. I'd love to know the exact color of gray that it is.
Right.
Whether it's one of the HGC approved grays. Another kind of silly anecdote too was, and I was just watching a previous video where we talked about this when presenting, but the original location was actually, it was closer to where the stands are for the football field, like actually further away from the school. And that was too close to the historic cemetery. And they didn't like they were concerned about the view from the historic cemetery. And we were like, I'm sorry, so the ghosts like don't want this. So that was another interesting kind of battle that, and I think that was really important for us as students and just starting out. And I know that the four of you have been very active in the community and kind of passionate about causes. And I think that's important to get up there and say your piece, and adults and people in power will certainly respect you, and you'll learn some interesting kind of nuances of how things work in this town.
So we laugh at the fact that they wanted the turbine to be an off-white shade of gray, but I think it's sort of emblematic of a lot of the issues we face with sustainability, where people take this like small minor point that is just so unimportant and they blow it up into a whole reason to stop the project. You see that with pretty much every effort to create major change in the world,
Yeah.
you know, regardless of what sort of effort it is. And I was wondering, I'll open this up to any panelist who wants to answer. How do you feel we should address these people? Like, we can't just ignore them, right? Like, these are concerns they have. What do you think is the appropriate way to address these people that come with these concerns that to us, you know, might seem really minor, but to them, it's a reason to oppose the project?
Well, I mean, going back to the color thing, I think compromise is helpful. We somehow, the people behind the actual installation and building were able to make that compromise. I think there's going to be times where they're going to come across roadblocks where it's harder to compromise, but I think it's definitely worth adjusting and trying to see from the other person's point of view, where if your passion is sustainable energy, someone else's passion might be the historic character. And if you kind of step into their shoes and come from their perspective, how can you make a change and find somewhere in the middle where you can kind of get both people's agendas moved along?
Yeah, and I think along those lines, it's important to remember that there will always be a small percent that is completely against your movement, and to not waste your energy on that very small percent, but use your energy to work on individuals who might be on the fence, you know, who you can really educate towards your mission and get them to change. And then you have a great enough group of people to actually push your mission forward, with or without, you know, the small oppositional percent.
I completely agree with that. And I would also just say, like, start small and set an example that you can look back on and say, look, this, you know, this did work. we did save this much money on energy costs or something like that, or we did save this many pounds of food waste, or whatever it is. Like have a small project that you can look back on and say, we did accomplish something, now let us do more.
I would say thank God for science, and thank God for science teachers, and thank God for, students who are embracing this to begin with, because with your probing and insights and energy, you can send your tentacles out into the community, starting with maybe your parents and other groups, to bring them on board, to sort of foment a passion for getting things done for the right reasons. And I think there's got to always be balance. Sure, we want to maintain the historic character of Nantucket and preservation of this. You don't want Camp Run Amok with, big gargantuan, ugly projects. I mean, I think the history and the preservation of Nantucket's architecture has been just commendable, but it can't be entirely at the, to the detriment of what is costing every islander money. The cost of electricity on Nantucket is no small thing. So finding different solutions that can be beneficial to every community member for the right reasons, and growing the scientific analysis and economic analysis for why it makes sense is something that you guys as students are perfectly set up to help the community understand. So thank you for your passion.
Ms. Erisman, you teach an environmental science course at the high school, so you're kind of helping educate this new the generation of students there. What would you say, like, of the lessons that you've taught and stuff, are there any that you think have particularly struck home or helped get in passion students that maybe weren't before?
So there are so many lessons throughout the environmental science curriculum that I teach that hit individual students differently. But one of the exercises I do with my advanced placement students is actually a solid waste inventory. So students have an entire week that they're actually responsible for collecting all of their solid waste. So not anything that would be of a health issue, but everything else. And for extra credit, students actually carry their solid waste with them. So you see them around school with their trash bag and then their bag of recyclables. And I found this to be one of the most eye-opening exercises for students, because when you're using a school trash can or a public trash can, or even the trash your parents take out, you just don't understand the enormity of what you produce. And I've actually had students during the week start curbing their behavior, saying, Miss Erisman, I used to go and get a coffee every morning on my way to school, but now I have all these lids and these coffee cups and these plastic utensils. And they actually shifted to using, a reusable coffee mug and bringing reusable utensils, because they didn't want to collect so much trash in their week. So I think that's probably, in general, the most eye-opening exercise I do with students.
Oh, that's crazy. That's like really intense. I can totally see how that would change people's behavior and make them act differently. Cause like you're seeing that, right there physically all the time. Like, I just started environmental science this year, and one of our first assignments was calculating our environmental footprint. And I played around a little with the calculator, and you can't, no matter what you do, you can't get your environmental footprint within the means of one Earth. It's impossible, because the calculator allocates societal impact from the country you're in. And because of the way the United States is set up, no matter what you do, no matter how sustainable you are, you can't get yourself within the means of one Earth. You have a lot of people who just don't want to make these major societal changes, but it's impossible to actually affect the change you need to affect without changing the society. And, I was aware of that, but seeing that so vividly right in front of me, where no matter what you do, no matter how you live, you can't get yourself within the means of one Earth, that was really eye-opening for me.
I just want to say the finding out your footprint and the carrying your trash around sound like amazing projects. And one of the things that I was thinking is like, you guys are already far advanced of like me by the fact that they didn't have environmental science when I was in high school. Or if they did, it was an elective and it wasn't pushed by guidance to be included. So I think that's just an amazing step. Like you asked Miss Erisman earlier, kind of what are some of the steps that have shown improvement? That right there is just the fact that they've hired a teacher to teach environmental science is amazing. And I think that students now are, I mean, you don't go a day without thinking in your head something about climate change or the planet or the future. And that's just a huge leap from where so many of us were even 5-10 years ago. So that's awesome that you guys are doing projects like that to just be thinking about it all the time.
So I wanted to go back to Miss Erisman asking about waste. So now because of coronavirus, we have gone to online classes, and we have stopped using paper as much. Do you think when we go into the classroom that will continue, or do you think things will go back to normal as they were before corona?
I think we have truly entered a new shift in education and a move away from a lot of the paper that you would have been getting. So I think even when you are back in the school building, it'll still mostly be electronic resources. I must admit, I have very mixed feelings about it. Paper can be sourced very sustainably. And even though it seems very wasteful as you're throwing it away, you can compost paper. So you can close that waste stream, and there's at least the potential to be sustainable if done right. Electronic waste makes me very nervous. So when we have a lot of Chromebooks and they're getting broken and, or chargers getting lost, those electronic pieces of waste don't usually get efficiently recycled, and they pose a major problem. So I am curious to see where this shift will take us as far as sustainability is concerned.
Does anyone on this panel know where the e-waste goes? I know that we don't have the superintendent here or anything, but that was something that I was really interested in, Miss Erisman.
Maisie, unfortunately, from what I've seen, most of it goes just into a trash can. So it'll go into the bulky waste, and there's no real recycling. I think like Chromebooks or computers probably go back to Dell. I think they have an exchange program, but like charge cords and old smartboard pieces from the school, they kind of go right into a dumpster.
And you mentioned earlier about how a lot of times the recycling is a challenge in the school, where like they have the recycling options, but students just aren't aware of them or they aren't using them. And I can answer this question. What do you think we need to do to get students to the point where they're actually using these recycling opportunities that are there, but are maybe not so obvious and so plain, like, and it just takes a little extra effort? What do you think we need to do to get the students to the point where they're actually using those resources?
That's a good question, because in my classroom, I would describe myself as one of the teachers who is very diligent about managing the recycling and the trash, and still trash gets into my recycling, like even when I'm teaching about it. So I think there's many ways to change behavior. I think ultimately change sometimes comes from pressure from your peers. Me as a teacher, laying down another rule sometimes gets overlooked, but when it's actually your peers saying, hey, that's the wrong container. These are the consequences of putting it in the wrong container. you're polluting Nantucket's water because you're putting something that doesn't compost into the compost stream. But I think that's a good question, John Carl. I'm not sure how to move everybody.
One thing I kind of thought of during this topic of recycling, have you guys in the Youth Climate Committee met Graham Durovich with the DPW? She's the town recycling coordinator. She's really awesome. I got to participate in this cool project this winter where we sorted a bunch of trash because she was part of that initiative of doing the compost, the Nurnic, the recyclables, kind of like separating out even more. And I think that would be a great project for the YCC to meet with her and see if there's any kind of campaign that you guys can run at the school. I'm sure she has a lot of great resources and would just be a good person to have on your team because she knows a lot. One of the things that was cool when I did that sort was that I got to be at the landfill, and she showed me a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff, and we talked about like what gets shipped off island, where does it get shipped, because a lot of like recycling and waste management, I think, especially with kids and students, is like once you put it in the trash can, you don't really think about what happens to it. And I mean, like Ashley was saying, like if you kind of say like this is going to go into the harbor, like do you know that, and really kind of like nail that home. But even if you just like got a tour of the facility here to see like where certain plastics go, and do they get like recycled into other plastic, or do they get put in a landfill? Do they get put in our landfill, or do they get put, you know, they get on a barge and they go off island to like the Midwest somewhere? I think that's fascinating. And also, I mean, I don't want to be like one of those like people that tells the youth what to do. But in terms of like your group, I think you have a lot of momentum. And I think it's also pretty special that two of you are also on Veritas. And, you know, do an investigative report of what the landfill on Nantucket does and where everything goes. And, you know, students trust you guys. You're a good source of news for them. So use that platform to kind of get some of that information out.
I would say that back to the using peer pressure, you know, I don't know how everybody feels about yelling at their friends for not having their mask on in a certain situation. But here you are. Here's another example of, as was stated earlier, you know, why did you put that aluminum can in with where it says glass? That doesn't make any sense. You know, it's easy to separate it if you just do it at the time. Afterwards, somebody has to do it for you. And we're in a society now where we need everybody to be accountable for all these little behaviors, and they're little, but they all add up. And I couldn't agree with you more, Emma, about maybe arranging a sort of a class trip down to DPW and seeing the digester in action and seeing who is actually, you know, are the hauling companies doing what they say they're doing? Are they bringing in materials all separated, or are they actually just accepting trash as it's presented to them? They should be rejecting it, you know, unless it's sorted. And I don't think they're doing that, but I could be wrong. And I would be thrilled if I found I was wrong. But once it finally gets to the landfill, somebody actually is going through and doing that. And great, you're giving somebody a job, but that's a horrible job. And it would be, you know, there's so much more that human being could be doing, you know, that'd be fulfilling if we could all just take the steps that are easy. And then you look at how that landfill has sorted itself out into such silos of just small little things. You've got mattresses in one place, and the leaf and yard waste goes into one pile, and that just by definition heats up to about 150 degrees or higher, and it cooks. It cooks all the weeds out. It cooks all the insecticides out, and it turns into some pretty good compost. So we're actually looking at a composting project out there And, because otherwise it could be reused. As a farming enterprise, we look at all the land that needs to be have regenerative behavior done so that it's richer soil, and we could use this very compost to help improve the soil so that crops could be more productive. So there's lots of things that, when you talk about sustainability, just what is going on with our trash, what are we doing with our food waste, can we compost all this stuff either at home or in some place at the dump? Yes, we can. So it's a good project for you guys to think about.
I think a trip oh, Sarah, you're welcome. Okay. So I think a trip like that would be super beneficial. I went to like a camp off island. We did something similar where we went to this recycling facility and kind of understood how these things worked, and it was eye-opening. So I think that would be a really awesome thing to do with maybe even an entire class of kids. But I was curious, Posey, if there was, on the subject of Sustainable Nantucket, what kind of things is Sustainable Nantucket doing with the high school? Is there anything set up for the future? Is there any ideas on the table to kind of help push this idea of sustainability in the high school?
Great. I'm glad you asked that. I can say, since arriving here, we have an actual farm to school program, and it's primarily focused on lower school and middle school. We have the Joyce Furman Garden right next to the administration building, and if you haven't been there, it'd be fun. We're really promoting through Dr. Hallett, allowing students to go and spend time in the garden, have classes in the garden, do art and music in the garden. So that's primarily available for all students sort of by appointment in this COVID environment. But all of the teachings and learnings and curriculum and kits and online stuff that our farm school program manager, Callan Duke, has done has really been focusing on really younger kids. I've been working with Act Smart Energy, which is the island's only solar installer, to put together a PowerPoint for the Nantucket Builders Association to bring to their attention the value proposition of solar plus storage. And they're working on a sort of a town warrant to be put before HDC on loosening some of the restrictions on putting solar on roofs, because obviously the price of modules, the cost of installing solar, the benefits from the state and federal government in terms of rebates, credits, and tax incentives continue to be pretty strong. So solar as a means of power is at its all-time cheapest. And when you pair it with a battery, it makes for a very powerful way to preserve and cut your energy usage in general. So if every house had some solar, it'd be great. It's just that there's those zones within historic district that it may never get past. But that's a small percentage of the houses on Nantucket. So we're doing this PowerPoint. I think the builders get continuing education credits. And as soon as we get that out there, what we want to do is work with you guys to bring this presentation so that it can be given at the high school, and you guys can help us adapt it to, what you're learning, through sustainability, and how to make this argument to your parents, your communities. Why is it worth something? Why is it worth looking at? And how quickly will it pay for itself based on your own energy usage? So that's a step that we're trying to take to sort of integrate more closely with the high school. We are looking for ways that we could come up with research projects and get funding for research projects around compost, and also around, what is it like to be a farmer? What are the budgets of farmers? How can we help farmers be more successful and cut their costs? Again, how to get more food available in the places where it's easiest to congregate and do one-stop shopping. as I mentioned in our sort of pre-session, there's not a single article of food grown on Nantucket Island that is sold at Stop and Shop. And that's something I think it would be really helpful to try and change. And I think it would be great to work with Nantucket High School students to try and make the case for that. So I have a lot of ideas, and I'm really looking forward to working with you guys.
And you mentioned bringing solar, talk about solar to the high school. And I think not just solar for the families and the students, but solar for the high school, right? Like the schools at the Nantucket schools are the single largest energy consumer on the island. They're the biggest one, bigger than the hospital, which makes sense. There's so many kids there, but it's a lot of energy. And the more percent, the higher percent that's sustainable, the better. And I know that there have been some concerns with certain roofs on school buildings that they're worried will leak. But I know there's other roofs that they aren't worried will leak, and there's just been some mix up with the bidding and stuff. But I really do see a future where there's solar on some or all, but at least some of the buildings that the school owns. And I think it's something that we've got to really keep pushing. Sort of, it's our generation's wind turbine, right? Is putting solar on the schools. I think it's the closest analogy there for that.
Those are some big roofs. I think there's room for it. We just have to make the right case and make the right economic case. It's because every dollar is precious. And so you have to make the right economic case for why this is a good use of school resources.
And I think, oh, no,
you go ahead. A question for Posey Constable. You were talking about making it easier and more natural to buy sustainable food at Stop and Shop. And do you think that you'd be open to maybe having a program with the school to bring in some produce for the school lunches? Because I think that would be, students would be definitely like to do that.
I love that idea, and it's something we broached with Linda Peterson at the Food Services Group. I know right now there is a truck. I think Island Kitchen puts the school lunches out for kids in need, and we were talking about bringing our van to the school and having it alongside with produce that we could collect not only from our own farmers but all the island farms, to the extent we can buy the produce at whatever reduced price we can, and then leave it in the parking lot, not leave it, but be available to sell it in the parking lot for families that don't want to, go to Stop and Shop, but can use the food benefits from the state and federally to get access to really good locally grown food without breaking the bank. How do we get more food into the school lunches and school cafeterias? I know that we already have a program with Linda Peterson called Harvest of the Month. I think it's primarily been a program that we've worked on with some of the lower and middle schools. And so, the difficult thing is in the winter months, we don't have a lot of greenhouses that grow food year round. We don't have geothermal greenhouses or things of that sort that make large-scale production of winter crops or even greens through the winter all that accessible. So, it is my hope that I can work with the Land Bank and with Community Preservation Committee on creating farm managers who can help grow more food year-round in these sort of greenhouses that are environmentally sound. It was the dream I had coming to this job. And, I got a little derailed by the pandemic, but, I've got the winter to work on it. And I really, I know that there's an opportunity there that has not yet come to pass. And I'm looking forward to making it happen.
All right. Are we at the portion where we're going to do the questions from the people in the audience, if there are any?
Yeah, so I've been monitoring the chat, so I do have some questions that I can pose to you all, but I do know Ashley Erisman was going to respond to a portion about solar with that conversation, so just want to give her a chance to to get her piece in, and then we can transition to the Q&A.
Well, thank you. I didn't have much to add, but I do agree that I think solar is the direction that the school needs to go at this point. It's always kind of blown my mind that intermediate school wasn't designed for solar panels. But I think that the high school is in need of a real upgrade, more than just small building details. And hopefully when that happens, we will be able to have a sustainable school, maybe with even LEED certification, to really hammer it home. I think that's the direction the community ultimately needs to go in. So I think, again, with students that are so focused on these issues, it makes it really attainable because you guys will be that push for change.
Awesome. Oh, Posey, go on.
Jumping in well. So Massachusetts enacted, a requirement for all new construction to meet certain, higher thresholds for energy efficiency in buildings. And I think if you're going to do a major renovation, you're also required to meet these new HERS, standing for Home Energy Rating System, thresholds that are above what the code was for buildings back in the 80s. So, one could strive to having more insulation, more solar, so that you're actually driving your energy utilization to, closer to zero. May not, in some of these older buildings, it's going to be very hard to retrofit, but you could put cladding on the outside of houses that has insulation buried within it. You can put more insulation in the roof. You can improve windows. There's a lot of things that, communities all over the United States are really honing in on how to make affordable housing more affordable by cutting the operating cost of living there, not to mention just, having access to getting the house. But if you get an affordable house and it's killing you to keep it heated, then what's the point? So I would say that in Nantucket High School has some opportunities. There's again, there are grants and all sorts of things out there that could be applied for to try and help one building at a time, maybe just improve the energy usage of the buildings and putting renewable resources on the roof in the form of solar with storage really add a lot of value to the enterprise. So, I think there are good resources through the town's energy office and through local solar and even international solar who have access to funders who get tax credits for investing in these projects that bring the cost of the energy down for the user, where the user doesn't actually own the project, but they get the benefit of the lower cost. So, that's a little bit of a finance twist, but, lots of things to think about. And I think the high school, given it is the largest consumer of electricity on the island, that's something I didn't know. And that's a factoid that, can be used to try and reduce what's being drawn in from these cables under the ocean. Because whatever the school's using means the cost of electricity is high for everybody on the island. So we're all bearing the cost of that.
Well, thank you, Posey, and thank you for that last piece there about that we all as a community are bearing that cost. So one of the questions I had come in is more on the emotional side of climate change, but to any and all panelists this speaks to is, what is a way that climate has affected you personally? What would be your climate story? And it could be the first time that you really thought long and hard about climate, or a time that really affected you. But I'll give you all the floor.
So, there's so many things to talk about. There's so many ways you can go with this. And I realize this isn't like a super local story, and maybe someone who goes after me can have a more local story. But I've been interested in climate activism for a while. I've cared about the climate for a while, but there's got to be something that happens that really pushes you to actually like fight for it, you know, like I care about a lot of things. What am I fighting for climate change? You know, like for gun control is another thing that I'm invested in, where I actually fight for it. And that was after the Parkland shooting, right? But for climate change, I was reading an article. It was one of the international organizations that assesses like what our carbon output's going to be over the next like X years, and how much sea level rise that's going to cause, and all that kind of stuff. And I was looking at the projections, and I was looking at the kind of, you know, the time scale that they were looking at, and all of the times, every single mark they had for irreversible climate change, every single mark they had where they were like, this is going to cause severe levels of human casualties, every single timestamp on there, I was going to be alive for it. Even the ones that were the furthest away, like 60 years away, you know, no matter how far away that timestamp was, I was going to be alive. And I was going to see these things, you know, if we didn't check our behavior. And that's still true now, you know, if we don't check our behavior, anyone who's in high school now, anyone who's in Gen Z or younger, you're going to be alive when the worst effects of this are happening. And, you know, it'll continue to get worse until we all go into mass extinction mode and our power plants collapse. But, you know, mass casualties, huge amounts of flooding, cities being depopulated, the projections, unless we do something, unless we try to slow it down, unless we switch to renewables, that stuff's going to happen while we're alive. And I remember like having a legitimate breakdown where like I was crying and walking through the woods, like, this is all going to be happening to me. This isn't happening to some future generation, right? This is going to happen to me. And how can I sit by and let all of this happen and let everything collapse and not try to stop it? And it can seem so insurmountable at times where you're looking at this obstacle and you're like, how can I impact this? How can I, you know, the numbers that are out there, everything's in billions, right? Like the amount of carbon being released into the atmosphere, the amount of people on the planet, and your impact can seem so minuscule. But, you know, I really do believe that everything counts. I really do believe that every one person's input counts. And beyond that, I'm not sure it matters, if that makes any sense. I think sometimes you have to do what is right because it is right, even if it doesn't affect a change. And I mean, yeah, that was really the moment for me where I was like, I have to do something about this.
I think maybe not so much a moment, but a feeling. And for me, kind of like the spurring moment was someone came in to the school when I was in middle school, and we watched Greta Thunberg's TED Talk about climate change. And it was really scary. And for me, but that was good. I mean, at the end, she said, I want people to be afraid. I want people to be scared because it's going to be my life. And I was thinking, well, it's going to be mine too. And I want adults who might not be around. I want them to be aware and be scared. And I want to be able to, you know, get people interested in these things, because you have to be passionate about them even if maybe it won't affect you. And I don't know, that was it for me.
I was just going to add to that, and kind of the idea of this fear of kind of going into the future, having science tell you like, this is the facts and this is all the horrible things that are going to happen to you, but also being able to look at science and be like, oh, there's solutions to this. There's things that we know, there's things that we can do, there's hope. So I think I'm encouraged by that fear, but I'm also encouraged by the fact that like, this isn't just something we can't fix. Like, this is where we start. This is what you can do. And maybe even if it's just for a peace of mind, or like John Carl was saying, like just doing the right thing. I think it's just, you have to get people inspired or afraid, like Greta Thunberg said. But yeah, I think that's my encouragement. It's a little bit of fear and a little bit of hope.
For me personally, I think it is really just scary looking at the news and seeing all like the news sources saying we have this amount of time to fix everything, or we have nothing else. like should go on. So I think it was at some point last year when John Carl did the climate the climate strike, and that was the point where I said I wanted to do something as well. And then he came and said something about doing this youth climate committee, and I just wanted to do something to be able to say that I have done my part. I want to continue to see the earth thrive and not, well, not to be a downer, but I don't want to see the earth burn.
So for me, growing up on Nantucket, I think the one of the eye-opening changes that I've seen is the flooding downtown to wake people up. When I was growing up, the only time Easy Street and that whole downtown area flooded was during the perfect storm. I mean, they made a movie about that storm. And now it is flooding, 10 times a year, I'd say at least, so that's very clear evidence, besides like animals coming out of hibernation earlier and things like that. But we really do have, I think, enough momentum to really make change. And if we run with that momentum, and you do need, unfortunately, a little bit of that fear in people, we're gonna make these changes. I'm confident we as humans can come together and do this. And Jane Goodall put it together. I'm going to paraphrase probably pretty poorly, but she said to think of the world like a jigsaw puzzle. And that when you first look at that jigsaw puzzle and it's all spread out, it seems really overwhelming. But then you realize that each person has their piece, and you just need to find those other people. And then we'll be able to fit the puzzle together and solve the problem. So I do have a tremendous amount of hope that we're going to do that.
Well, there are plenty of things to be concerned about with the climate. The one that is most astonishing to me is the loss of biodiversity across the world. I think the most recent thing I read, I'm going to get the magnitude wrong, but the trend is clearly horrifying. I think 60% or more of the creatures of the world have disappeared in our recent future, recent history. And, I don't think we can reverse that. That's done. But we should sure as heck be concerned about capping it so it doesn't happen further. I don't know, without the kind and sage point you just made, Ashley, about everybody finding their puzzle piece partner to affect the change and stitch this thing together. But not to hear the birds in the morning would really be most upsetting. Not to mention, bees to propagate all the food we eat. So that we owe our fellow species a lot, and we've taken it all from them, and we need to be their champions.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for sharing kind of these feelings and thoughts around climate change. And I think it's so important to keep in mind in this community, as Ashley said, with Nantucket and witnessing the flooding in the downtown, we have a story to tell, and that story is powerful, and our stories matter, and they're how we get people to come together to take on this challenge we're all facing. So I want that to keep that in mind and keep people inspired. It is it's a difficult challenge, but I believe we can only overcome it together. So, and we also have Mary Longacre in the comments asking us to attend the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee's meetings. So I think that would be great. But before we sign off for tonight, just want to highlight that this was the first community event hosted by the Youth Climate Committee, and that they've done an excellent job already in raising awareness about climate change within the Nantucket community, and just highlighting ways we can come to solutions that already exist. And I'm just so excited to be working alongside them and all of you to do just that. And so excited to see what they accomplish together next. Also, just want to say thanks to all our panelists who participated and supported this meaningful dialogue around climate change with passionate members of Nantucket Youth. And last but not least, thank the Remain Nantucket Fund for their support, as well as Acclimate and Kim Rose for working so hard to establish September as Climate Change Awareness Month, that this event was seen to cap off the month for, as well as promote other climate-focused events. This is how we really make a splash, no pun intended. And last but not least, just look forward to more community events with Mass Audubon and the Youth Climate Committee, particularly a Youth Climate Summit coming this spring, meant to be a day of climate education and empowerment. So again, thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thank you, everybody. This has been amazing.
Seriously.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.